This is Wednesday, June the 22nd of 2016, and this is Damian Macy. I'm representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library in our oral history project. Today, I'm fortunate to have with us Beverly Pearce. She was not born in Marshall, but she's had a long-term residency here now, and I think we'll probably hear in her story what brought her to Marshall, and she's been a part of the business community, she and her husband. And with that, I'll introduce you to Bev Pearce.
Do I have to hold it? Okay. Well, I was born September 3rd, 1950 in Geneva, Illinois. My parents were Audrey and Albert Armbruster. I have 3 siblings, all brothers. Oldest brother is Paul. Second brother is Peter. And third brother is Brett. At the current time, both of my parents and the youngest brother, Brett, are deceased. I moved to Marshall in June of 1979 when we opened the funeral home here and named it Moore Pearce Funeral Home. Our first day of business was July 1st, 1979. What was your neighborhood like?
Yeah, I know
Our
you
childhood.
did not grow up in Marshall, but
Right.
How about did you go to school in Geneva?
Yes, I did. Born and raised there.
What about the school system and maybe some of your early memories of school there?
I attended Harrison Street Elementary School. And last time I was in Geneva, I had the opportunity to go by that school, and it has multiplied in size about tenfold. We lived on a street that was just 3 blocks long. We lived at the end of the street. Very quiet neighborhood, till my brothers decided they were going to launch rockets and things like that.
Did you walk to school?
We did walk to school. It was about a 6-block walk. Several kids walked together. There were a lot of kids our age in our neighborhood. So, I don't know. Attended Harrison Street School through 6th grade, and then went to the junior high, which was then called Cold Trap Junior High.
Just like the name sounds?
Yeah. And then went on to Geneva High School, graduated in 1968.
Did you have a favorite subject in school?
Probably literature, but I didn't really like school very well.
What was your least favorite subject?
History. I did not like history at all. So, had a few high school friends that I am still in touch with now through Facebook. And I don't know. While I was in high school, I also attended Patricia Stevens College in downtown Chicago. And after high school, I worked a couple years and then went to Western Illinois University.
What did you major in there?
Business administration.
Is there particular memories of things that you have, say, about high school and those early education years that really just stand out?
Not really. No, it was a difficult time. I don't remember. I don't remember a lot of social activities outside of high school. We kind of kind of stayed to ourselves, really. I had a couple of close friends that I would hang around with, but not a whole lot. So.
You said earlier, I think you had stayed in contact through Facebook with
Mm-hmm.
some of your early friends. Are they still in the Geneva area, or have they also gone out to other parts of the country?
They're not in Geneva, but they're within about an hour of Geneva. Yeah. And I'm a quilter, and just by chance, one of my friends that I'm still in contact with is a quilter. And I didn't know that until just last year.
Really?
Yeah. So.
What kind of brought you into the quilting?
Just by chance, I took a Lakeland course, a non-credit Lakeland course, and it was offered here in Marshall at the high school. And that was the beginning of the addiction.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
You mentioned coming to Marshall, but your name must have changed in there somewhere between Geneva and Marshall, right?
Yes. We were married in Geneva in 1973. My maiden name was Armbruster. And we were married March of 73, and in August of 73, we moved to Delavan, Illinois. And we were there for 5 years. And then we moved to, Jeff was born when we lived in Delavan. He was born in Peoria. And from Delavan, we moved to Flora, Illinois. And we were there for just 1 year. And then we bought the funeral home here in Marshall.
How did you and Ed happen to meet?
Ed was serving his apprenticeship under my uncle. My aunt and uncle were licensed funeral directors in Batavia.
Okay.
And he was working, they were a part of a chain of 3 funeral homes, and he was serving his apprenticeship under, not the Batavia one, but the one in Geneva, and they all worked together, so. And ironically enough, I met Ed at my great-grandfather's funeral.
Okay. So there's a magnetic attraction right there.
Just kind of a family thing.
So then, when you first got married, you said you lived in
We lived in Geneva
for a while. Okay.
for a few months. And when we got engaged, Ed asked me when I wanted to get married, and I said, well, I wanted a spring wedding. And he didn't really care for Geneva too much, so he said, well, then it's going to be this spring because I'm not staying another whole year.
I like that.
So we got married, we got engaged on Valentine's Day and married on March 24th
Okay.
of the same year.
Was it I guess I'd say a disruptive force to move away from Geneva and family and all, or?
It was kind of culture shock because Geneva is a Chicago suburb,
Yeah.
and we moved from there to Delavan, a town of 1,800. But I went to work at Commercial Bank in Peoria, Illinois. When we lived in Delavan, I went to work in Peoria, so my days were still in the city.
When you were growing up and at home, did you have particular chores and things that you had to do, or did most of the brothers take care of those things?
No, I don't recall my brothers taking care of anything except mischief. I would help my mom with laundry and some cleaning, and a lot of times Mom worked for doctors' offices, and so when I got home from school, I would start dinner of an evening. But other than that,
And you mentioned walking to school, and I know this was about at a time where school buses and cafeterias and all were kind of really beginning to take place. Did they have a cafeteria, or did you have to take your lunch?
No, we took our lunch. Actually, we were close enough that we had long enough that we could come home for lunch and go back, which we did frequently. So.
You mentioned your mother working. Did she fix a lunch for you, or did you fix that yourself?
No, she fixed it. Yeah, she fixed it.
Do you remember what you had for lunch in those days?
No, I really don't. I'm sure just a sandwich and an apple or something like that.
But it worked.
Yeah.
Okay, with mentioning you married that guy, Ed, and you moved to 2 or 3 different places. What was the decision to, quote, come back home or to end up in Marshall?
Well, I think Ed always wanted to, because he had worked for Mr. Moore when he was in high school. What happened was, when we were living in Delavan, the owner was ill, and he was in a position where he reached a stage in his health, with his health issues, that they decided to sell the funeral home. And they offered it to us, but we felt that the price was far too high. So we we went looking for places to buy and found a place in Plymouth, Indiana. I think the name was the Johnson Funeral Home. And we put earnest money down on it. And Mr. Johnson told us that someone else had an option, a first option, but that option was supposed to expire within the next week or two after we put earnest money down. So we heard nothing from them. So we assumed that it was ours. And Ed had put in his 2 weeks' notice. And then we got word from Mr. Johnson 3 or 4 weeks later that the person who had the option decided to buy it. And there we were without employment. So we quickly looked around to any place we could find employment. And that's how we moved from Delavan to Flora. And Flora was not a good experience for us. We didn't like it at all. We liked the people in Flora, but it was a difficult work situation. So then he got talking to Marshall, and I think with Ed's father's help, who was a close friend of Mr. Moore, and the Moores were ready to retire and move out of the funeral home. And I think Ed and his father just got together with Mr. Moore, and we ended up buying the funeral home in Marshall.
Had you been to Marshall? Obviously you had some.
Just to visit.
What was your early impressions of that? Is that a place I want to live?
Well, I think after being in a small town for 5 years, I was fine with it.
Okay.
Yeah. When we first moved here, my impression of Marshall was that it was very cliquish. It was hard to get to know people. But that improved when Jeff was old enough to start school, and you just got to meet more people, and get more involved with school things through the kids, and so.
So that was not then necessarily another culture shock.
It was not, because Marshall, even to this day, is bigger than Delavan. and like I said, neither one of us wanted to stay in Flora. So.
I'm sure Ed was glad to be back closer to family.
Yes,
and all
yes, yeah.
So you bought the Moore Funeral Home, and now then it became, I believe, Moore Pearce.
Right.
Were you active in the business in
No.
early years?
No, not really. We moved here when Jeff was 3, I believe. And then I think we were only here a year, and then we were expecting Sarah. I worked when we first moved here. I worked at the bank in Peoria. But then after Jeff was born, I worked for a little while and then quit, and I was pregnant with Sarah, so, and then I just didn't go back. So, but I wasn't really involved in the funeral business,
Okay.
Other than maybe helping them answer phones and things like that.
You had some family ties, obviously, with the funeral business from what you said earlier. And I think a question many people ask is, gosh, is that kind of a, quote, morbid thing to be living where there are bodies and all of that? And I don't mean to be negative, but some people have a very negative reaction to that, I think. How about yours?
No, I kind of always admired the way my aunt and uncle lived. And they lived, like Ed and I do, they lived upstairs above the funeral home where the living quarters were separate from the funeral business. I think I probably would have felt differently if the living quarters were part of the funeral home, a part of the business on the same level, and people kind of wanted to visit and take over and stuff all the time. And not that I don't love visiting with people, I do, but it's just nice to have the living quarters separate.
Is it a different environment of raising children in that kind of a situation as opposed to a freestanding house not by itself?
I think it is. I know when Jeff was at an age where he was looking to go to college, into his high school years, he said he was never going to be a funeral director. And we asked him why, and his response was because he would never want to require his children to be quiet all the time.
I like that.
So Jeff did go to college, and he went into automotive technology, and he was within just one semester of finishing that degree, and he decided he was going to go to mortuary school.
I wasn't sure where it was in his career, but I knew he changed channels.
Yeah. So we requested that he finish his automotive degree and then go ahead and get to mortuary science, which he did. So.
Were Mother and Dad both a little pleased at his decision to do that?
Yeah, I think we were both happy, and he does an excellent job.
Oh, yeah.
It's great to have him home, and his family, and all of our grandkids are right here, close by. It's awesome.
So you obviously have never regretted then moving to Marshall.
I don't think so, no.
Good. One period of time, and I can't remember when it was, but you were involved in a business here downtown, weren't you?
I did have
Fabrics and draperies?
No, my business was, I owned a place called the Stitchery Accents, and it was cross stitch and needlepoint. But I shared shop area with Patty Tingley, who had an interior decorating. So, and we were, when we first started that business, we were in the Snedeker building.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were there for a little while, and then we moved over to the Finkbeiner building.
Okay.
Not the one on the corner, but no, I take it back, not the Finkbeiner building, the Blankenship.
Okay.
Where I think his name was Omer Blankenship, had a drugstore. So, yeah, Patty and I were in there. And then Patty and Paul Tingley moved, I believe, because of Paul transferred to the Indianapolis area. So
I
Patty
do
had to
remember
leave.
you being over here. I I guess I forgot about you moving across the street.
Yeah, yeah. And Patty had to leave, and it was too large of an area and too expensive for me to just handle it by myself, so I just closed.
Have you kept the interest going and doing?
Oh,
cross
absolutely, yeah. I have to say quilting is my passion now, but I still do cross stitch and needlepoint and knitting. Mm-hmm.
You belong to a group, don't you, that's the...
The National Road Quilters. Mm-hmm. National Road Quilt Guild. And I was not a charter member, but it was in existence for a year or two when I joined.
How many are in that?
That group is about 5 years old now, and there's about 30 members, somewhere around 30.
Okay. Well, I think it's wonderful, the quilts that you've given to the veterans.
We do veterans
those are
quilts.
beautiful, just gorgeous.
We do veterans quilts. We also do children's pillowcases for Sarah Bush Hospital. And many years ago, myself and 2 other ladies were the founding mothers of the Wabash Valley Sewing Connection in Terre Haute, which still exists. So,
You say sewing, but now does that cover a broad range of what you sew?
that's not just quilting, that's all sewing.
Sewing Connection.
Wabash Valley Sewing Connection. Uh-huh.
And are you still involved in that then?
No.
Do they do things primarily for, I guess I'd say charitable work then, and doing it for other places?
I really don't know because I haven't been involved in that for over a decade, so I don't know what they do now.
What might be your other hobbies? Maybe something that even started back when you were a youngster that you maybe carried forward as a hobby?
I don't remember. I remember my mom and my grandmother teaching me how to sew. But of course that carries into the quilting. But when the kids were little, I did clothing sewing, garment sewing. I made a lot of their clothes. But other than that, as a child, I remember being involved in high school, being involved in some girls' sports, but that was very limited. Back in those days, there weren't many to be involved in. So,
did you take I guess maybe it would have been the home ec department, some sewing there?
I think I did, yeah, a little bit. Going back to childhood activities, I do remember I took baton lessons for years. Yeah. I never carried that into high school or anything like that. But I was advanced enough that I twirled fire batons. Yeah. So I have to say that was a major childhood activity of mine.
Ever get hit in the head with one?
Not while it was on fire.
I think that ought to be on the news somewhere and have a demonstration downtown.
That was so many years ago, I don't think it's possible now.
Does Ed know that?
I think he does.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he does.
Were you involved in a baton group in the band in high school?
Not in high school,
program?
but our baton group had, we would do parades when we were children. Got into high school, we didn't do that anymore, so.
Graduated. Huh?
Yeah. So.
In your first coming to Marshall and the year, I remember that pretty well. We had moved back here in 1975, but do you have a particular image of things in Marshall? It's changed quite a bit downtown.
It has changed quite a bit downtown. I know there was the Western Auto Store was still here, which is where we are right now. It's now the library.
That's right.
Ed's father owned the insurance agency, Marshall Mutual.
Marshall Mutual. And it was around
It was
on 6th Street.
on 6th Street, right at the alley there. I don't know what's in there now.
I don't think that too.
I remember Tark Bennett had a printing business. And the restaurant that's now the family restaurant was Tom's.
Everyone seems to remember Tom's.
That was a local hangout. And there was a ladies' clothing store by the name of Hedges.
How about the drugstore that was right next door here? Martin's?
Martin's, yes, it was Martin's. And I think one of my favorite stores was the Bargain Outlet. And I don't remember the name of the man that had that. Harvey something. Was it Harvey?
Kessler, I believe.
I think so. Was it Harvey Kessler?
I think so.
Yeah. And there used to be a Dog and Suds south of town.
Oh, yes. I understand for part of the Wall Dogs thing, they're having a Dog and Suds reunion.
Are they really? I didn't know that.
Darryl Harlow is back from Florida, and he and some of the family are having a Dog and Suds reunion.
I did not know that.
I was talking to Darryl Lee last week. And there was a little thing in the paper also.
Okay.
With those, I guess you might say an active business community downtown, is there something in particular that you say made all of that disappear?
The businesses that have changed? I don't know.
Walmart.
Oh, well, yeah. I suppose Walmart would be an influence. I don't know. That's probably the biggest influence, I would say. It's hard to compete with Walmart.
At least in your business, that's something you don't have to worry about them, I
Yeah.
don't think, getting involved in.
Yeah. I didn't know it at the time, but the lady that owned, or opened at least, the Western Auto Store was Sue Kemp. And she became one of my best quilting friends. And I'm sad to say she passed just a couple weeks ago. But she and I became very close friends through quilting.
Was she a quilter before you knew her, or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. The way I met Sue was that she called me one day, and she and a group of her friends from Chicago every year rented a cabin on Kentucky Lake during the quilt show in Paducah.
Okay.
And one of the members of that group had passed away from an illness, and they had an open spot for somebody to fill in the cabin. And Sue just called me out of the blue one day and asked if I wanted to spend a week in Paducah, and I jumped at the chance.
And that became the tie then to the group?
And she and I have been best friends ever since. So
The designs and the patterns that you have in the quilts and I'm not sure how many people work on a quilt, but is there some decision-making process that you go through to decide we're going to do this or a wedding ring pattern or whatever they are?
a lot of it is individual. Most of it is individual. However, our quilt guild does do a raffle quilt every year that we raffle at the fall festival. And that's a group project. Other than that, like the quilts we do for veterans and other donation quilts. I think we're going to do some for the ambulance service here when they have to take a child somewhere. But those are all individually selected and made. You know, those aren't group projects. I mean, it's a group, it's one person doing each quilt,
Okay.
but it is a group project for the guild, so.
Some of those patterns seem to me so very intricate and so complicated. Do you generate your own design? Or are there some that you say, oh, that's one I'd like, and I'll copy it? Or how do you come about with that design?
Well, there's a lot of quilting magazines out there with quilt patterns, quilt pattern magazines. That's where I get most of mine. But there are computer programs where we can get on and design our own. I don't know. I've not done that, but I know Sue did several.
Because some of them, as I say, are just so intricate and so complicated that there must be some roadmap or something.
Yes,
that can
yes,
get you
there is. I've made quilts that have only taken me 2 days to make, and I've also
Really?
made quilts that have taken me 2.5 to 3 years to make. It just depends on the time I have to give it and the complexity of the pattern. And
Now, how about all those pieces of fabric? Do you collect fabrics throughout the time and the
Oh,
years,
yes.
or just stash them away and then use them, or how do
Oh,
you
yes.
how do you get the materials for that?
every quilter I know has a stash.
That's a
that they can pull
professional
from.
term, right?
Yes, it is. It's part of the addiction. And I do remember one time, not long ago, my daughter Sarah walked into my quilt room and she said, "Mom, you just have way too much fabric." And I said, "Sarah," I said, "you know that quilt I just gave you?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "I didn't have to go shopping at all. It was all right here." She's never said that since.
So do you have a large closet or something where you do have it all laid out where you can look at it and see it then?
My quilt room is so full that I can hardly walk through it.
Really?
I have floor-to-ceiling closets that are jam-packed and stacks of fabric on the floor that I don't have a place to put.
So are those pieces that you will use, or do you bring some of those to a meeting with your quilting group to share with others, or?
No, these are pieces that I will use. We do sometimes have a swap where if it's something you decide you don't want anymore, bring it to the guild and swap it out with something that's there that you do want. So.
Somewhere, it's south of Evansville, and maybe it's Paducah, there's a large quilt museum.
That is in Paducah.
Paducah, okay. I know you've been there then.
Yes, I
We
have.
visited there several years ago. It's fascinating.
It is. And one of my quilt friends that lives in Arizona has a quilt hanging in that museum this year.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
I guess looking at the care and the preservation of some, not in a museum, I know that's all humidity controlled and temperature controlled and everything there.
Yes, it is.
But if you just have maybe an heirloom quilt at home, how should that be maintained and kept?
I store mine in, there are boxes that are made for storage that are acid-free. There's tissue paper to wrap the quilts in that is acid-free, and then you put it in these storage boxes. It's not wise to store quilts in plastic tubs, but a lot of people do. I know one time I went on a quilt retreat to St. Charles, Illinois, and the lady that was sharing the table with me was telling me that she was engaged, but she had been living with her boyfriend for several years. And they had been living in his grandmother's house. Well, they had just purchased their own home that they were going to move into. And they were cleaning out grandmother's house, and in her basement found a black plastic garbage bag. And when they opened the garbage bag, there was a quilt in it. And in examining the quilt, there was one small area that was starting to dry rot. And she asked him who made quilts in his family, and he said, well, it wasn't his mother, and he didn't think it was his grandmother. So they didn't know the age of the quilt. She decided she would take it to someone to appraise this quilt and find out value. And he kind of poo-pooed the idea and said, with that dry rot, he said, it's not worth $100, don't bother. And she said, no. She said, I'm going to take this and have it appraised. Well, he argued with her, so she decided that she'd make him a deal, and she said, if it's less than $100, I will pay you the difference. And she said, if it's more than $100, you will pay me the difference. Well, he was silly enough to agree to that. On the way to the quilt retreat, she dropped it off at a quilt store because she knew that they had an appraiser coming in that weekend. And the appraiser called her while she was at the retreat, sitting at the table with me. And the appraiser said, well, if it were not for the dry rot, this quilt is worth about $6,500. She said, but because of the dry rot, she said, it's only worth about $4,800.
Still a chunk of change.
She immediately called her boyfriend, her fiance, and said, get your checkbook ready. I'm going shopping. So they can be very expensive. I didn't see the quilt. I don't know what it looked like. I don't know how much detail was in it. But it was obviously very old.
Now, can places like that dry rot be repaired and restore it in such a fashion that it would bring the value back up?
No. It can be repaired and restored, but then you're introducing fabrics that are not old, and it doesn't help the value of it. So.
Because I know lots of times paintings maybe have a little tear or some missing color.
Yeah.
And they apparently can be expertly restored and will be valuable again.
Yeah. No, actually, when you introduce today's fabrics into an antique quilt, it actually devalues it. So, anyway.
With the experience you've had living in different towns, is there a person or an individual who really you feel has influenced you in your lifetime?
Oh gosh. I have to say, probably right here in Marshall. And then I have a quilt friend who now lives in Tennessee, but I met her on a quilt tour of England and Scotland.
Okay.
And her name is Paula. And I have to say her and Sue, and then I do have another close friend here in Marshall by the name of Ruth. And I think those three have probably been the most influential for me.
With your childhood and coming to Marshall and all, is there some event, maybe even a national or world event, that has really indelible in your memory?
Probably the World Trade Center bombings on 9/11. I can't think of... I remember as a teenager, I was a teenager when the Cold War happened between us and Cuba. And I think that really, I thought a lot about that, and that really disturbed me at the time.
It wasn't very far from the United States borders.
No,
in fact.
no. I do have my grandparents, my father's parents, were both from Germany. We've done some ancestry searches, and we do still have my father still has a cousin that resides in Germany. I think 2 cousins maybe. But I remember my dad saying that my grandfather moved over here as a child. Well, both grandparents did. But my grandfather's middle name was Adolf, and he had that legally changed. They wanted no association with the Hitler regime, and they legally changed his name.
World War II, I think, brought a lot of that about, with
Yes,
people purposely changing their names.
yes, yes. And I had great-grandparents that were from Poland originally, and they changed their name change their last name to avoid, try to avoid German persecution during the war. And then they immigrated to the States.
Have you done any genealogy research to work back to some of those families?
We did, and actually Jeff has done some. We had a family Bible, so we had some research there. But going back, he can trace it back so far, but then there were so many records burned and missing during World War II that we kind of can't get back further than that. So.
Have you ever done any research with one of the Mormon libraries?
No.
Because they have fantastic genealogy material.
Really?
There's a family research center in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And I sat down at a computer one time, and in a matter of a few minutes, part of my mother's family went back to 1600.
Oh my.
So I mean, it's really a great resource. You might want to consider sometime.
That'd be worth it. Yeah.
And I think they've got some centers throughout the state. One time I thought there was one in Danville, but I'm not sure.
Now my mother's side of the family was, her maiden name was Arbazani, so that's an Italian side of the family. And there's still a large part of that family in the Geneva area.
How about going back across the pond to research any of them?
There are cousins in Italy, but we don't know where.
Okay, that's usually the problem with most families.
Yeah.
Especially if there's been any transition of names and all. It's really difficult to get back to them.
Yeah.
With the, I guess the historical events of 9/11, that's something many people mention in their history. Then we've got so many modern things around us that we live with. Is there something that you'd say, gosh, I just could not live without?
I don't know how we live without how did we live without our cell phones? I don't get that. Oh gosh, I don't know. I guess all our modern appliances, and we're a very mobile society, so the automobile, I think, has come a long way.
You want to go back to bicycle or horseback? Huh?
Well, not for great distances, no.
Well, Bev, it's been a delight visiting you, and there's usually one question I ask most people when we wrap up. If you went over to Italy or Germany to visit some of your relatives, you said, I'm from Marshall, Illinois, and they'd say, where on earth is that? What would you tell them about Marshall and why they might want to visit here?
I think Marshall is a small community with a lot of pride. It's not it seems like so many of our towns, our small towns, are struggling financially, and property values are not maybe what they should. And I don't see a lot of that here in Marshall. I think people are, for the most part, respectful of each other and each other's properties, and really care about the town. I mean, I really do think that. Not being from here, and being from a larger metropolitan area originally, I think Marshall does very well for a small town. And I think one thing that I enjoy that makes that evident is the community band that is still in existence every Friday night. It's a whole community gathering.
Been doing it since 1875.
I know, that's amazing. And it just brings a sense of community caring and community pride together. So yeah, I would love for, I mean, I don't even know these relatives. I've never seen them. They were my father's and mother's relatives. But yeah, if they would come this way, I'd say, you will like this. So.
Well, thank you, Ben. I think that's a good summary of our community, and people in their properties even seem to take good pride of ownership. Mm-hmm. And many people visiting say, my gosh, it's so nice and clean. And the care that people take really shows that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I agree.
And it's been a delight having you. I appreciate this time so much, and thank you for your time and your efforts to be with us.
Thank you, Damien.
And Bev, these are not necessarily for tomorrow or next year, but these things will be on record and for the future. And somewhere probably someone will come along and say, gee, I didn't know that about Bev.
Thanks
again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.